Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the international community should oppose extremist and xenophobic ideologies. In a virtual address to the 20th summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Khan says Pakistan has been on the forefront of the struggle against terrorism for a long time. He asserts that the world should speak out against unilateral actions in occupied territories. Touching upon other regional issues, the Prime Minister reiterates there is no military solution to the conflict in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, security forces have killed regional Al-QAEDA leader Mohammad Hanif during an operation in Farah province. In a statement, the Afghan Directorate of Security says the Al-QAEDA leader was given a safe haven and protection by the Taliban. But the Taliban are yet to respond to the allegations. Armenia, Azerbaijan and Russia have signed an agreement to end 6 weeks of fierce fighting in NAGORNO-KARABAKH. Under the deal, Armenia has agreed to give 3 regions around Karabakh to Azerbaijan. Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has described the development as painful, but Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev calls it a historic day. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, and now the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the international community should oppose extremist and xenophobic ideologies. In a virtual address to the 20th summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Khan says Pakistan has been on the forefront of the struggle against terrorism for a long time. He asserts that the world should speak out against unilateral actions in occupied territories. Touching upon other regional issues, the Prime Minister reiterates there is no military solution to the conflict in Afghanistan. Khan lauded the efforts of the SCO in promoting regional connectivity, saying it is the only way forward to achieve peace and prosperity. In Afghanistan, security forces have killed regional Al-QAEDA leader Mohammad Hanif during an operation in Farah province. In a statement, the Afghan Directorate of Security says the Al-QAEDA leader was given a safe haven and protection by the Taliban. But the Taliban are yet to respond to the allegations. Earlier, 4 policemen, including an officer, were killed and 20 people wounded in a car bomb attack in Faryab province. No group immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. Violence has soared in Afghanistan in recent months, even as the Taliban and government negotiators hold peace talks in Qatar. Indian troops have martyred 2 more civilians occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youths were killed during a military operation in the Shopian district. The operation in Kutpora area was jointly launched by the Indian Army and the Central Reserve Police Force. Following the operation, Indian authorities suspended internet services in 2 districts. The valley has been under a curfew and communications blackout since India revoked its special status in August last year. Azad Jammu and Kashmir's President Sardar Masood Khan says the international community has failed to resolve outstanding territorial disputes. Addressing a seminar commemorating Junagadh Black Day in Islamabad, Masood said the disputed areas of Kashmir and Junagadh are the unfinished agenda of 1947 partition of the Indian subcontinent. He said illegal occupation of Jammu and Kashmir, Junagadh by India is unacceptable to Pakistan. In his address, Nawab of Junagadh Jahangir Khanji said the accession of Junagadh was Pakistan's most cherished dream envisioned by the founder of Pakistan, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, at the time of partition. The state of Junagadh opted to accede to Pakistan in accordance with the ideology of Pakistan, but Indian forces illegally occupied the state in a sheer violation of international law on the 9th of November 1947. Armenia, Azerbaijan and Russia have signed an agreement to end 6 weeks of fierce fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Turkish counterpart Mevlut Cavusoglu discussed the deal by phone. More in the following report.
The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which simmered for decades despite international efforts to mediate, erupted into fresh fighting in late September. 3 ceasefires have failed in the past 6 weeks. As of today, Azerbaijan, Armenia and Russia have reached a new deal to end the conflict that has left over 1,200 people dead. In a televised meeting, Russian President Vladimir Putin confirmed the total ceasefire.
Today on November 9, President of Republic of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev, Prime Minister of Republic of Armenia Nikol Pashinyan and President of Russian Federation signed a statement which declares the complete ceasefire and any military action in Nagorno-Karabakh war zone starting from midnight of November 10, 2020 Moscow time. The Azerbaijan Republic and the Republic of Armenia stop at the present positions.
Under the deal, Azerbaijan keeps its territorial gains and Armenia has agreed to give 3 regions around Nagorno-Karabakh to Baku. Azeri President Ilham Aliyev said the historic agreement showed it was a clear defeat of Armenia. Aliyev said Armenia signed the agreement due to Baku's iron fist, not Yerevan's own will. He also announced a Turkish and a Russian joint peacekeeping mission in Karabakh. As part of the deal, Russia has deployed its peacekeeping troops to the mountain enclave of the region. In Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, news of the agreement brought people onto the streets to celebrate despite a curfew. But in Armenia, the agreement sparked outrage, with protesters storming Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's official residence in Yerevan. They called for the PM to step down after he announced the painful deal.
In the existing situation, there was no chance of making another decision. I plan to tell more details, why it was made and what was the reason behind the last month's events. I can't do it right now for one simple reason, because stopping military actions are in the main process right now, and if I say something, I can endanger people.
Meanwhile, there are disputed accounts coming out of Armenia. The Defense Ministry says military actions in Nagorno-Karabakh have ceased completely, but Prime Minister Pashinyan says they were not over yet.
One of the most prominent Palestinian political figures, SAEB EREKAT, has died after contracting COVID-19 virus. Prime Minister Mohammed Shataya announced the 65-year-old chief Palestinian negotiator's death at Hadassa Medical Center in Jerusalem. Officials said EREKAT contracted corona on October 8. He was put on a ventilator after undergoing a medically induced coma before death. EREKAT was Secretary General of the Palestine Liberation Organization and an advisor to President Mahmoud Abbas. EREKAT has served as the Palestinian's chief negotiator in peace talks with Israel for the past 2.5 decades. He also helped negotiate the landmark Oslo Accords in 1993, which helped creating the Palestinian Authority in West Bank and Gaza Strip. U.S. President Donald Trump's campaign has filed a lawsuit in Pennsylvania challenging President-elect Joe Biden's win. The lawsuit targets Pennsylvania's Secretary of State and county boards over allegations of unfair elections.
At a press briefing, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany said the campaign wants an honest, accurate, and lawful vote count. The lawsuit alleges Pennsylvania's mail-in voting system lacked transparency and verifiability that were present for in-person voters. The lawsuit claims Pennsylvania officials violated the United States Constitution by creating an illegal two-tiered voting system. Trump has so far refused to concede defeat in the election, making unsubstantiated claims over voter fraud. Meanwhile, Attorney General William Barr has authorized federal prosecutors across the United States to pursue substantial allegations. In a letter, Barr asked the prosecutors to ignore fanciful and far-fetched claims.
The international community has criticized the U.S. over its human rights record during a UN rights review. From the detention of migrant children to the killing of unarmed black people during the Trump administration, participants highlighted what they called a grim record of human rights in the United States. During the half-day session, activists called on President-elect Joe Biden to usher in reforms. China and Russia called on the U.S. to eradicate structural racism and police violence. France demanded the halt of executions at the federal level and the closure of Guantanamo Bay prison. The UK called for ensuring access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services. Venezuela and Cuba said the world superpower must provide equal access to healthcare amid a pandemic. Over a dozen countries voiced concern at Washington's position on family planning. Addressing a news briefing, Director of the Human Rights Program at the American Civil Liberties Union said the session was an unsurprising condemnation of Washington's human rights record. Defending U.S. policies, Assistant Secretary of State said U.S. presence in the session exhibited its commitment to human rights. China says U.S. sanctions on 4 Chinese officials in Hong Kong is a serious violation of international law. Washington imposed these curbs over their alleged role in the Hong Kong crackdown. At a news briefing, a foreign ministry spokesman termed the move blatant interference in the city's affairs. Wang Wenbin urged Washington to immediately reverse the move and not go further down the wrong path. Hong Kong Chief Secretary Matthew Cheung dismissed the sanctions, saying they will not be intimidated. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the sanctions bar officials from traveling to the U.S. He added their U.S. assets would also be blocked. And now it's time to take a short break. Stay with us. Now moving on to the European Union has refused to attend a conference on refugees in Damascus. In a statement, the EU said the conditions inside Syria were not suitable for large-scale voluntary returns. Scheduled for the 11th of November, the 2-day international conference has been convened by Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. On Monday, Russia's president urged Syrian refugees who fled their country's civil war to return home to help rebuild Syria. In Iraq, 2 security personnel have been killed and 6 wounded in a roadside bomb explosion in the northern Kirkuk province. In a statement, Iraq's military said the bomb detonated near a military vehicle in Kirkuk village. The blast occurred 1 day after 11 people were killed and 8 wounded in an attack on a military post in the capital. Earlier, the Iraqi security forces carried out a series of airstrikes against ISIS in a recently launched offensive. In Jordan, polls have opened in the parliamentary elections amid a surge in coronavirus cases. More than 4.5 million people are eligible to vote in 23 constituencies for 130 contested seats. 15 seats of the parliament are reserved for women, 9 for Christians, and 3 for minority Chechens and Circassians. Politicians have been appealing to Jordanians to turn out and vote amid widespread calls for a boycott of the tribal-dominated assembly. However, the reported turnout is disappointingly low. Jordan is facing its worst economic crisis in years, with unemployment and poverty exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Ethiopian military has seized an airport in Tigray's town of Humera. The town is located near the borders with Sudan and Ethiopia. The state media says the action is a continuation of the military response against the Tigray's People Liberation Front. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says he is not disregarding international calls for calm. A government spokesperson says the Prime Minister acknowledges international concerns, but Tigray conflict is an internal matter. She added Ethiopian government will ultimately make decisions in the long-term interests of the country and its people. Earlier, Sudanese media reported several Ethiopians, including soldiers, are fleeing to neighboring countries as the conflict intensifies. Over in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has suffered a heavy defeat in the House of Lords over his controversial Brexit legislation. The Internal Market Bill contains measures that overrule parts of the UK's Brexit agreement with the EU. The Lords voted against a key clause that would allow ministers to break international law by 433 votes to 165. The government does not have a majority in the Lords, and even some high-profile Conservative members oppose the clauses. London says it will reinstate the clauses when the bill returns to the House of Commons next month. Meanwhile, Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney said the EU cannot ratify a new deal while the UK is legislating to break a previous one. The bill is designed to protect trade between Britain's four nations after Brexit. The US has become the first country to cross 10 million COVID-19 cases with over 238,000 fatalities. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed over 1.26 million lives and infected nearly 51 million people. More in the following report.
Over the last 24 hours, the world has seen two completely dichotomous scenarios related to the coronavirus pandemic. On one hand, the United States hit the grim milestone of infections mark. Two top vaccine developers have lit the beacons of hope. After the reassuring announcement of Pfizer and BioNTech, the World Health Organization called for faith in science. Experts worldwide have also welcomed the breakthrough as watershed moment in which indicates that vaccines can help halt the pandemic.
Well, my initial reaction, of course, was light at the end of the tunnel. A bit of good news, something to make us smile, because cases of COVID are going up around the country, which doesn't make us smile.
The United Kingdom's Prime Minister Boris Johnson, however, says it is still too early to rely on the COVID-19 vaccine. British Deputy Chief Medical Officer also seconds the Prime Minister, saying it does not see the vaccine making any difference for the second wave the United Kingdom is in now. In Russia, officials claim that their Sputnik V vaccine is also more than 90% effective. Meanwhile, Brazil has suspended clinical trials for China's Sinovac vaccine due to its adverse effects that occurred late last month. Like the rest of the Eurozone, Hungary is also set to introduce new curbs to stem the exceptional spike in cases. In France, authorities say the country is at a crucial moment as the peak of the outbreak is still to be seen.
You know it. A massive second wave is hitting the Northern Hemisphere, the United States, Russia, and Europe. The epidemic is progressing in Europe and France at different speeds depending on the countries and territories. All the regions of France are impacted.
Over in Asia, China has reported 22 new cases overnight. India's death toll has reached over 127,000, while the virus has infected 8.5 million people so far.
In Pakistan, 23 people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, increasing the toll to 7,000. The Health Ministry says the 1,637 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said out of over 346,000 cases detected so far, 319,000 have recovered. It said there are more than 20,000 active cases in the country with over 1,000 in critical condition. Amid the second wave, the authorities have imposed an array of stricter restrictions across the country. Pakistan-Russia Federation Special Forces Joint Exercise Druzhba 5 is underway in the Tarbela area of Haripur district. In a statement, Pakistan's military media wing said the exercise is aimed at sharing both armies' expertise in counter-terrorism. It said the participating troops busy in practicing counter-terrorism drills and procedures, rappelling and preparations for skydiving. The ISPR says sports activities are also part of exercise. The exercise dubbed Druzhba 5 will continue for 2 weeks. Earlier, Russian ambassador to Pakistan Nanga Parbat and senior officials from both countries reviewed the exercise. In the Central African Republic, the Pakistani contingent of a UN peacekeeping mission has built a new bridge to boost local infrastructure. It was handed over to the local authorities in Bangassou, a city in the southeast of the country. More in the following report.
The city of Bangassou is opening up a little more to the surrounding populations with the creation of a new bridge. The bridge was built by the Pakistani arm of the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic. It is one step to improve the road infrastructure between Bangassou, Rafai, and Zimo.
The bridge is quite an important tool that facilitates the movement of people. It is also quite an important tool to enable us to implement MINUSCA's mandate, which is centered on protecting civilians.
Carried out less than in 2 months before the elections, the rehabilitation of the road infrastructure by MINUSCA will facilitate the electoral process.
All the more so, since soon we will begin to receive within our walls the various candidates for the presidential and legislative elections who will travel through our villages, our municipalities for their campaign. It is appropriate here to say thank you and to perpetuate this collaboration.
Located 734 kilometers from the capital, Bangassou is a landlocked city that benefits from the Obangu River to trade with the neighboring Congo and the riparian regions. It took an average of a month until recently to drive from Bangu to the Obo city, even further east. This period could soon be reduced to 1 week.
In Mozambique, militants have beheaded more than 50 people in the oil-rich province of Cabo Delgado. Police say the assailants abducted several women and children, besides killing dozens of people. In a report, Amnesty International said the province of Cabo Delgado is facing a humanitarian crisis. It said more than 300,000 people have been displaced there. It blamed the government for committing human rights abuses during operations to curb the insurgency. More than 8,000 refugees have fled Ivory Coast since its disputed presidential election last month. The United Nations said the number of fleeing the country has doubled in the past week. The UN Refugee Agency said most of the refugees fled towns in western Ivory Coast and crossed into Liberia. It said the people in border areas were fleeing preemptively and that no particular ethnic city appeared to have been targeted. It added that a small number of refugees have arrived in Ghana, Guinea, and Togo. President Alassane Ouattara's main opponents have refused to recognize his victory and are now facing criminal charges for creating a rival government. Tropical storm Eta has struck U.S. southern state of Florida with strong winds causing torrential rainfall and flooding. The storm knocked out power for over 28,000 consumers before heading back towards the Gulf of Mexico. Eta made landfall on lower Matacumbe Key with maximum sustained winds of 100 kilometers per hour. The National Hurricane Center said though the storm is headed offshore, it still threatens Florida. Forecasters fear Eta could still cause flash flooding in the southern U.S. state. The storm is expected to slow and further strengthen over the Gulf of Mexico. In a statement, Queen Elizabeth deeply regretted the tragic loss of life and destruction caused by Hurricane Eta. In Peru, government officials have released 1,040 baby Tarikaya turtles into the Nane River in the Amazon region. The yellow-spotted river turtle has become vulnerable due to poaching and human activities. 850,000 baby turtles are expected to be released this year. Officials said the release has been made on behalf of all the ecosystems of Pacaya Semiria Natural Reserve. Officials said they have freed some 2.5 million Tarikayas in the last 2 years. Local media says thousands of eggs were incubated by Peruvian environmental authorities since August. Scientists say glaciers in China's Qilian Range are disappearing at a shocking rate due to global warming. This raises the prospect of long-term water shortages. More in the following report.
With the rising temperatures, the outlook is grim for the 2,684 glaciers in the Qilian Range. The largest glacier in the 800-kilometer mountain chain is set to further decay or even vanish by the mid-century. China Academy of Sciences reports glacier retreat across mountains was 50% faster during the 1990 to 2010 than it was in 1956 to 1990. Scientists say the 20 square kilometer Lahogo Glacier has retreated around 450 meters since the 1950s.
When I first came here in 2005, the glacier was around that point there where the river curves around. But now, after around 15 years, the whole glacier has shrunk by more than 150 meters. The speed that this glacier has been shrinking is really shocking.
Since the 1950s, average temperatures have risen 1.5 degrees Celsius and snowfall has been minimal but not enough to compensate for the loss to the glaciers.
It does worry us, but now the climate across the entire world is warming and we cannot stop this warming process. The only thing we can do now is to minimize the impact of global warming on the glaciers.
Large sections of the Shule River on the outskirts of Dunhang are either dry or reduced to patches of pool. Experts have warned that peak melting in Chilean may be reached by 2050, after which the glaciers will have either disappeared or shrunk considerably.
Colombia's chorus of florists put on a spectacular flower festival near the city of Medellin. The country's flower-growing fame came into the full bloom at the annual competition. More about the colorful parade in this report.
Celebrating the art of floristry, aficionados came to the small town of Santa Elena. Their elaborate floral arrangements are locally known as ciletas. The mountainous area around the Medellin is famed for its flora, and families have dedicated themselves to flower production for generations.
It has been very different, but we have found many things in our favor. 1. We were able to create the ciletas within our families. 2. We are representing the many dreams that defined our families, our children, our spouses, our parents.
More than 60 years on, the humble parade has evolved to become a prized event on Colombia's cultural calendar. Many of the arrangements drew inspiration from current affairs in the country. The winner says he sought to cheer Colombians up amid the pandemic.
The idea comes from wanting to bring a beautiful message to Colombia, to tell them to not lose hope, to not lose faith, to believe that everything is going to come back the way it was before. And most importantly, we can't lose what the world means to us, which is happiness.
The annual flower parade reportedly harks back to 1957, when a Medellin local invited florists from nearby villages to march in the city to display their arrangements.
And now it's time to take a short break. Stay with us. The US has expressed disappointment about the European Union's decision to impose tariffs on American goods. Earlier, EU Executive Valdis Dombrovskis said the bloc will impose penalties on an array of US imports. US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said the EU has long proclaimed its commitment to the World Trade Organization's rules. In a statement, Lighthizer added today's announcement shows Brussels only follows WTO rules when convenient to them. The European Union is pushing ahead with a plan to hit $4 billion of American goods with tariffs. The bloc says it still hopes to settle the fight, with both sides agreeing to drop countermeasures. U.S. stocks are trading mixed after excitement over signs of a first successful late-stage COVID-19 vaccine trial faded. Investors continue to pull money out of the big tech companies that have been benefited most from the pandemic. The Dow Jones Industrial Average continued sharp gains from the previous session as it is trading marginally higher. The S&P 500 dipped at the open, trading lower by about 0.5%. The Nasdaq Composite is also trading lower by over 1%. Meanwhile, oil prices rose as hopes of a new vaccine outweighed expected negative impact on fuel demand of new lockdowns to curb the virus. EU regulators have opened a second investigation against e-commerce giant Amazon for its business practices. Amazon is charged with distorting competition in online retail business. In a statement, EU antitrust chief Margaret Vestager said the bloc is probing Amazon's dual role as a marketplace for merchants and a rival seller. She said the action has been taken following complaints from traders about the company's practices. The charges come as the pandemic has amplified Amazon's role in the global economy, with online sales soaring. Walt Disney says it is furloughing additional workers from its theme park in Southern California. In a memo, Disneyland said it still does not know when the state will allow it to reopen because of the coronavirus pandemic. Disney officials said the additional furloughs would affect the executive, salaried, and hourly workers, but the numbers were not provided by the company. Disneyland said it hoped to get the employees back to work once it eventually reopens. The decision comes on top of the 28,000. And now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. And for the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.